Hey, welcome back to the Mark Cox Hour. This is the third hour, and this is Chris Arps guest hosting. In the studio with me, I've got Representative John Wiemann. He's going to be with us for a couple of segments. And I also have in as my third hour in-studio host, Jim Gwinner, partner with the LS2 Group. Jim, how are you?
I'm doing really good, Chris. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you for coming in. I'm glad you got your voice back. You said that you were a little hoarse there.
I lost it on Tuesday, got it back a little bit on Wednesday, suffered through the holidays, and I'm here.
Just for Mark.
Just for you. Just for you.
Excellent. Well, one thing that I want to talk about is pension reform, especially on the state level, and we'll get into the national level later. But a lot of these pensions are in deep trouble. And, of course, when they're in deep trouble, we all know who eventually is going to end up taking care of that is the taxpayers. And is there some legislation or is there anything going on about that in the legislature?
Well, at this point, at the federal level is really what we're most concerned about. The states had their own issues with regards to pension reform, but at the federal level, there was some reform that was done back in 2014 to try to address this issue with the multi-employer pension plans.
Right.
But the problem, that solution didn't really solve the problem.
Right.
And so we're really needing the federal government to step up and make some additional changes. Right now, there's about $100 billion of potential liability out there, of which there's only about maybe $49 to $50 billion that are there in the pensions guarantee fund to protect those pensions. And they're projecting probably over 100 of these different pensions to have some financial insolvency problems.
So what happened? Why did these pensions, or why are they becoming insolvent? Aren't the companies were supposed to contribute to these? Aren't there union contracts that say they're supposed to contribute so much to these pensions? Why are they in the sad shape that they're in?
Well, there's a lot of reasons why they're in bad shape. One is the employers didn't put in the money they should have put in. Right. They made the benefits too generous. Right. I mean, the list goes on and on. People are living longer. People, it was a combination of factors. Downturns in the market. That's what we're facing right now in Missouri. I'm on the Mosher's board, Missouri State Employees Retirement System, and we're dealing with legacy problems that are now finally starting to come home to roost. And those projections that we were making on rate of return were too high. We didn't account for that, so we didn't therefore put enough money into the fund. So it's just the storm has finally arrived. We all knew it was coming. Right. We're here now. We need to deal with it. And at the federal level, it's pretty serious. At the state level, it's bad as well. But we're going to start looking at making some decisions. I don't know if we'll do it next year, but certainly within the next 2 years, we're going to have to make some decisions, tough decisions with regards to what we do in Missouri.
And that's Representative John Wiemann, represents Lake St. Louis, or
I'm in the Cottleville, O'Fallon, Weldon Spring area.
So it's December. Almost. We got about another week, and then after that, the new legislative session starts in January. What should people that don't have a life and follow politics that closely, what should we be expecting?
Well, every year we have our typical things that we deal with funding for education. We deal with the typical things that we normally do in the state of Missouri, balancing our budget. That's the one thing we have to do constitutionally is make sure we have a balanced budget. Sure. We can't print money in Missouri like they do at the federal level. But I would say you could probably expect to see some additional things regarding tort reform, labor reform, such as paycheck protection. We're going to take a look at that again, I think, and also a public sector union, which was a bill that I had sponsored in the House last year. I suspect that'll be another priority moving forward. Then you've got another one that the governor's really pushing for, some regulatory reform, which I have a bill that I'm going to be probably filing sometime early in December as well. And so there's going to be a lot of things that we're going to be looking at, but it's going to probably be another. And then, of course, most importantly is tax reform. Right. My own senator that lives in my district, Senator Bill Eigel, he is proposing a tax reform bill that's going to be pretty significant, and we're looking forward to seeing the details of that plan.
And there's no details, of course, yet, but I mean, is there a climate in the Missouri legislature to get tax reform done, or is it going to be like it is on the national level, a bunch of wrangling back and forth and different constituencies wanting to keep their goodies in it, or do you see this as something that's going to sail through pretty quickly?
Well, there's certainly an appetite for tax reform in Missouri. Missouri needs to be more competitive against our peer states. We're right now. Our taxes, although they're lower than some other states around us, they're still not as low as they should be to attract business and retain businesses. And so we're looking at reducing that. We're going to have to make some adjustments. We're going to have to. I know that Senator Eigel's plan is to reduce that rate down, eliminate the lower four brackets of taxes down to zero, just move it down. But then, in the meantime, increase some other taxes. Like he wants to have a 6 cents a gallon sales tax on the gasoline. Yeah. So that'll offset things. And then, in addition to that, just try to look at some tax credits and try to really find ways to reduce the other tax deductions that are already on there by just similar to what the federal government's looking to do. What President Trump is trying to do is kind of similar to what Senator Eigel is wanting to do in Missouri.
Every year we always hear about how bad the roads are in Missouri and that we've got to do something. You don't hear as much talk about that this session as much. Is it still a priority, or where are we at with that? You don't hear.
Well, that's definitely a priority. And the problem I have is that every time we start talking about transportation and the problems with our roads and stuff, the only solution I ever hear is, well, we just have to raise the gas tax. And I just think that's very, very one-dimensional in your thinking. And I think there's more ways to skin a cat to get more money into the transportation funding. Quite frankly, I think we're not getting the bang for our buck. And I'll give you an example. Okay. In my district, we're looking at there's a overpass. They're looking at putting on and off ramps. Okay. The projected cost of just putting on and off ramps, the overpass has already been built, is $9 million. Right. I just don't think that it should cost $9 million to put on and off ramps onto an overpass. So I don't think we're getting the bang for our buck. In addition to, certainly we need to look at some other alternative funding sources.
What do you say to the critics who say, Missouri has one of the lowest, if not the lowest, gas tax in the country? When people, and I have to admit, I've traveled to New York in the car, to see my sister-in-law, and we've traveled different places, and the roads look a heck of a lot better than they do in Missouri. The roads are almost embarrassing. I mean, isn't there a way to sell it as like, hey, our roads are pathetic. This is costing us productivity. What's so bad of another penny or two gas tax when it's already the lowest?
I get what you're saying. We tried that already a couple years ago. We actually put it to the vote of the people, and it was voted down pretty substantially. I want to say it was like 60% vote against it. So it's not like we haven't put it to the vote of the people to decide whether they want to tax themselves more on the gasoline tax. I think certainly, we have to look at all avenues. Right now, Missouri's 7th in the country as far as the number of road miles that we're responsible for as a state. That means we have over 35,000 road miles that the state of Missouri is responsible for. And what I think we need to do is we need to maybe seed back some of those roads back to the local
that's
counties.
Not very popular. I heard that being suggested before.
But if you offer
shot down,
the reason why it was shot down is because the cities and the counties were like, well, we don't want to. If we're going to get stuck with the bill. And I'm saying, don't give them the roads back unless you give them the money to go with it. And I think they can do it a lot less expensive than the state can as far as maintaining. For example, in my area, in O'Fallon, Highway K is a state highway. It's maintained by the state, but it runs right through the middle of the city of O'Fallon, and they have to deal with MoDOT all the time to try to get anything they want to get done. They have to deal with the state. They would much rather be in charge of that highway, that portion of the highway.
Now, one thing that's been in the news the last few weeks has been this battle between the governor and the state education board, and he wants to reform it to put people that are more amenable to charter schools. Where do you see that? Where do you see that going? And is there anything the legislature can do to help the governor? The people he wants on his board on this.
The governor has the legal right to appoint people to serve on that board, and if he chooses to remove someone from that board or appoint someone to that, or someone resigns and he wants to fill that vacancy, then he's perfectly within his rights to do that legally. As far as the legislature, all we can do is just confirm those appointees. So I don't know what else we can do. I know it's been kind of a political nightmare right now as far as, there's been a lot of infighting going on. But ultimately that's his right as the governor of the state of Missouri to make those appointments. And, who he puts on there is it's up to him. Now, obviously, it has to go through confirmation through the Senate, but that's just the way the government has it set up.
Right. Another issue that's been getting a lot of play in the news has been low-income housing tax credits, which is a program the state has set up to try to spur low-income housing in Kansas City and St. Louis and in some of the rural areas. It's been criticized for years, saying that these are just boondoggles for developers to get rich, and the state of Missouri is not getting its share. It's not getting its share of the bounty of all this. You have developers that have started projects in Kansas City, low-income housing tax projects, and now with this seeming to be in jeopardy, they've stopped it. Is the commission? The commission doesn't make the decision to get rid of these low-income housing tax credits. They're just suggesting, right? So this program is not gone.
Yeah, that is correct. Right now, my understanding of what's going on is the governor has this commission set up to basically evaluate where we're at, what's going on, what's happening with these tax credits, how are they being used, and are they being used with the way they were intended to be used. And so that's really the question, is once we get an idea as to the final determination as to whether we think that program's being abused and not being used the way it was intended to be used, then we can make decisions. But that decision is made by the legislature as far as we have to change the laws, and the governor would have to sign that new change before any changes would occur regarding those tax credits.
Not to put you on the spot, but I will. What is your position on low-income housing tax credits?
You know what? I'm open to. I'm not a big tax credit person. Normally I'm usually opposed to tax credits about 95% of the time, but I always leave that 5%.
Right.
If they return on the investment to the taxpayers, because that's really what it comes down to. The state of Missouri is an investor in essence. By giving those tax credits, we're investing in whatever that venture is, and so with the idea that will benefit the state and the taxpayers in the long run. So if it can be proven to me that making an investment in low-income housing or whatever other tax credit you want to have will be a true positive return on investment to the taxpayers of Missouri, then I'm more favorable of it. So it just depends on where the program is at and whether it's truly benefiting and doing what's it intended to do for the state of Missouri.
And your main piece of legislation that, if you get it passed, I had a banner year. What are you going to be?
Well, I have two big ones that I'm really looking forward to. I have a regulatory reform bill that I'm going to be putting forth sometime in December. I'm going to file it. And then I'm also looking at public sector union bill that if I get those two bills passed, I will consider that a huge success for me.
What's in that bill?
The public sector union bill, basically, it's dealing with unions that are working with state employees or public sector employees. And it deals with on a couple things. It deals with transparency, so greater transparency, because it's surprisingly enough, public sector unions do not have to follow the same rules that private sector unions have to follow with regards to disclosure of their financial statements and things along that line. So we want to level the playing field in that regard. Then there's also this thing that's called recertification. So some states like Wisconsin do it every year. They have to recertify their union to make it be in existence. I'm more open to maybe a 2 or 3 year process. Like every 2 or 3 years they have to do it. And the reason why is that allows new employees that come in to work there with the state or county or whatever, that if they get a chance to vote on whether they want to be part of that union or not. So, and there's a bunch of other provisions that go in there, but in essence, it holds the public sector unions to the same criteria as the private sector unions, and just provides more transparency.
That's actually a Show Me Institute commercial that I've heard where they suggest having unions have to certify every year instead of once you're in for good. So,
yeah.
Representative, thank you for coming in. Give the folks there a website that they can reach you, or if you have something that you want to promote.
Well, I mean, you can certainly go to the house, house.mo.gov. My campaign, I don't know if you want my campaign.
Go for it.
It's www.john.wiemann or johnwiemann.com, and Wiemann is WIEMANN.
Excellent. Well, appreciate you coming in.
Thank you.
Appreciate the time. And when we come back, we're going to have LS2 partner Jim Gwinner, my third hour